All right, the New York Giants. Our preview for the 2025 Giants. Their offseason in 60 seconds. Signed Paulson Adebo, 3 years, $54 million. Javon Holland, 3 years, $45 million. Russell Wilson, 1 year, $10 million. Darius Slayton, 3 years, $36 million, 22 guaranteed to come back to this team. Chauncey Golston, 3 years, $18 million. James Hudson, Roy Robertson Harris, Jameis Winston. They lost Azeez Ojulari, Drew Lock, Jason Pinnock, and Adoree Jackson in free agency. Drafted Abdul Carter with the 3rd overall pick, Jackson Dart with the 25th overall pick, Darius Alexander, a defensive tackle in the 3rd round, and running back Cam Scadabo in the 4th round. Derrik, what are you most excited about watching with the 2025 Giants?
I mean, this one's pretty easy, but like it's the front, right? It's the only obvious.
Yes.
It's like the only obviously good unit on this team, where it's like, okay, you drafted Abdul Carter, who not just like picking him was exciting, but he's looked insane in the preseason. Brian Burns, we know to be a good player. Kayvon Thibodeau is fine, but if he's moving down the totem pole, I think that helps a lot. And then Dexter Lawrence is like the only defensive tackle left, or nose tackle in the league who could ever win Defensive Player of the Year. So if that front is as good as we think it can be, and even some of the depth pieces look nice, then like that's what you want to tune in to the Giants for every week.
Yeah, to me, Dave, that's the easy answer. Like, this group has a chance to be hellacious in the best case scenario. I'm very excited about, and again, I think the Kayvon Thibodeau point is a perfect one. If he's your 3rd edge rusher, and now he's the 3rd piece, you can get all 3 of those guys on the field at the same time with Dexter Lawrence. I do think that can be a driving force of this defense, even if we have some questions about some of the other pieces. To me, that's the obvious answer. I'm going with something that I do feel like this has been a talking point for Giants fans all offseason, and I am buying it a little bit. This idea that even if Russell Wilson is an imperfect quarterback and he does end up becoming the quarterback for this team, at least he's willing to chuck it down the field in a way that Daniel Jones was not. If you look at it last year, the Giants threw 20 plus air yard throws, 9.6% of dropbacks, which was the 27th highest rate in the league. The Steelers were 7th in the NFL, and that includes the Justin Fields part of the Steelers season. So if Russ can do nothing else, it can be bombs away. And I am excited to see what Malik Nabers and Darius Slayton could look like in an offense that includes a lot more aggressiveness than the version that we got last year with Daniel Jones.
I also think, even though I think efficiency-wise, the hit rate for the deep balls last year for Russ and really the past handful of years has not been that great. That's also been in part because he's been playing more with, like, George Pickens is not a run away from guys player. He is a go up and contested catch player. Cortland Sutton in Denver was kind of a lot of that player. Malik Nabers and Darius Slayton, they're kind of more fit to the moonball, just give him like 2 yards of space to put it over the DB and run under it. That could get a little bit more of the good Russell Wilson back. I don't know if that's enough to really mean anything, but it at least does, like, personnel-wise fit him a little bit better.
Nabers did what he did with Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito throwing the ball. And I feel like people don't say that enough. And so even if Russ doesn't play a lot for some reason, like if it has to be Jameis Winston or Jackson Dart, like it's such a clear upgrade all through the quarterback room. I mean, the sky's the limit for what I think Malik Nabers is capable of.
What are the swing points of the 2025 Giants season? The areas where this year can pivot for the Giants. Dave, why don't you kick it off?
I think it's only fair that I kick it off because I fell for the banana in the tailpipe last year where I was like, this pass rush is so cool. Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau. Surely the rest of it doesn't even matter. And guess what? It mattered. So I just want to see better play from the back end of the New York secondary. Like it doesn't have to be an elite unit, but it was bottom 5 in the league last year. Like they did not get interceptions. They had 5 on the year. 5th worst in pass EPA allowed in the league. They were 4th worst in yards per attempt. They allowed the 3rd highest opposing quarterback rating. Pick the stat. They were awful at it. And even a great pass rush can only do so much. Credit to them. They're trying, right? Like I know a lot of people aren't super high on Paulson Adebo as like this shutdown corner. I would argue I don't need him to be. I just need him to raise the floor of that unit. And it's not like they put him at the top of the market, like in all the numbers, his contract, $54 million total. It's like top 10-ish, which isn't overpay because that's the nature of free agency. But I don't need this guy to be all pro level for this contract to be worth it. And you could say something similar about Javon Holland. So those two, if they can at least raise the floor of this thing and let the pass rush matter, I think it could make the defense obviously much better and make this a much more serious team as a result.
Derrik, I see you kind of like
I was going to say, I'll be saying
shaking
more
over there in your chair.
I'll be saying more about Javon Holland later. I think a little bit more highly of him, I think, and I'm pretty excited about that.
I'm excited about Javon Holland. The corner spots, I think, are worth having some questions about. They gave Paulson Adebo a lot of money. That cornerback market this offseason was fascinating, and we've talked about it a bunch of different times. We had like 5 or 6 guys sign the same contract, and Byron Murphy was the only other second contract player, and not even really second contract, but a younger-ish player to sign that sort of deal. So Byron Murphy, and then it was Byron Murphy, Carlton Davis, Charvarius Ward. They all signed the same deal. All of those guys are better players than Paulson Adebo, but they're aging players. They're third contract guys. And so Paulson Adebo, as a second contract player, gets paid at the same rate. But this idea, and this is kind of my concern about Paulson Adebo, Derrik and I, we've talked about this. I think this is one of those contracts you hand out and it's like, oh, we solved this. And then that's not the case at all. And we just know that cornerback play is very volatile. And I think that he is in that group of corners where you might have to expect some volatility. I don't think it's necessarily solved because they signed Paulson Adebo in free agency. Cornerback contracts in free agency are a crapshoot. They do not always work out. And in the worst case scenario, that's kind of what I'm looking at here. He absolutely could be a serviceable corner that, like Dave is saying, all we have to do is raise the floor on one side of the defense. Javon Holland has to be the guy that we want him to be. We feel good about Drew Phillips. We feel good about Tyler Nubin. The pass rush is disgusting, and this becomes one of the best 12 defenses in the league. But I do think that there's some volatility with those corner spots, not only with the Debo, but then the other outside corner spot, like Deonte Banks has been a huge concern as a first-round pick. And so if a Debo is volatile, and then you can't rely on the other outside corner spot, that's where I think you can start to poke holes in what the ceiling of this defense looks like overall, even when you take into account how good the pass rush should be.
Yeah, they're betting on the pass rush and then the inside part of the secondary with the nickel and the 2 safety spots, like having this cascading effect on the rest of the guys. But, Paulson Adebo, we'll see. I think he probably won't be bad for them, but the cornerback 2 spot is very, very treacherous territory, I think.
What is your swing point for the 2025 Giants, Derrik?
The quarterback. It kind of has to be. And we've talked about it a little bit and hinted at it. And like, again, I think with the receivers that they have, there's some chance that the Russell Wilson deep ball roulette works out a little bit better for them. But even if it does, I think the other parts of Russell Wilson's game at this point are a little bit dubious. So I think it ultimately comes down to, like, do we see Jackson Dart, and what does Jackson Dart look like when he plays? And I know that he's put up insane preseason numbers, and I don't want to say that he's been like secretly bad in the preseason, but it's kind of just a lot of RPOs, go balls, and like screens. Like he's made like one real throw a game, which is to be expected given the offense that he was coming from at Ole Miss. And I think us knowing that he was going to be a little bit of a project. So I think the swing point is basically like, do they feel like they can play him in week 5, or they are holding out until week 14 and hoping they have enough wins to keep him on the bench?
My curiosity with this, and I think when they decide to go to Jackson Dart may be an expression of this. What type of limited do the Giants want? Is it the limited that Russell Wilson gives you, or is it the limited that Jackson Dart gives you? Because Jackson Dart has obviously looked great in the preseason. He's looked great running the Ole Miss Jackson Dart offense. And I am open to the idea that pairing with him and Brian Daboll doing that sort of stuff can work. Because when you think about Brian Daboll's history, not only do I think he's trying to find his Josh Allen from like a vibes perspective, and I do think the little bromance happening between Jackson Dart and Brian Daboll is partially that. Like, Jackson Dart as a dude was very well regarded in the process, and I think they're bought into him as a person, the way he carries himself, all of that. But Brian Daboll is somebody, going back to his time with Josh Allen, they'd used a ton of college stuff, whether that was the things that Cole Beasley was bringing, all the RPOs that they were using. Brian Daboll's always been very interested in the college game and curious about it. And so he's well suited to tailor an offense around Jackson Dart's strengths. You're going to run into some limitations. You can't just play that way in the NFL. Eventually it's going to be 3rd and 7 and you're going to have to make something happen. But Russell Wilson is also a limited player. Russell Wilson also is taking things off the table because he is your quarterback. So what version of limited they want, that to me is the question that they're going to have to answer as they go through this season and they run into walls with either one of those quarterbacks.
To me, it's like, what kind of mistakes are you okay with living with? Because we know what mistakes Russell Wilson is going to make. He's going to take a lot of sacks. Every now and then he might, turn down some stuff over the middle of the field. With Jackson Dart, there are definitely like schematic limitations to these two players that, again, are very different. So you kind of have to commit to one, I think, as soon as possible. But to me, with the mistakes with Dart, you just don't know. Like, as a rookie, I mean, I can say that, like, coming in, I was like, oh, his pocket presence and coming from the offense that he came from, the timing's probably going to be up and down. But you still don't know what the mistakes are going to look like until he makes them. Whereas with Russell Wilson, like, you kind of know what that music sheet looks like already.
And that's why I kind of think Russell Wilson's going to have a long leash, because the limited they want is the limited that keeps them in a job. And you can, like, win games and maybe not look pretty, but win games with Russell Wilson being limited the way that he is.
I just don't know if that's true. I guess that's my question here, is that actually the version of limited that you want? Which is ironic, because it wasn't Russell Wilson's whole thing being Mr. Unlimited. He is not unlimited as a quarterback. He is very limited at this stage.
Well, okay, not to get into like this big existential thing about the nature of quarterback development, but that's why it's such a spot to have a first-round quarterback that you want to develop with a regime that we think at least needs to win to keep their jobs. Because ideally, I'd way rather throw Jackson Dart out there if he's ready and just see what he can do and develop him and see what the ceiling looks like. But I assume Brian Daboll can't really afford to do that if he wants to keep his job. And so I get your point. And I don't think that many people, I don't think there's anybody left that's excited to watch Russell Wilson in 2025. But if it's keeping you in games and giving you a chance to be in the conversation, I think that's ultimately what a coach and GM on the hot seat would opt for, at least until Russ proves that is not a viable strategy anymore, which could happen.
The one thing I will give in point of Jackson Dart, and I think in terms of the production, it could still be very up and down for him, and I think he has a lot to learn. One, like you mentioned, Robert, he seemed to be very well regarded as a guy, which I think will help you live through some of these ups and downs that you're going to have as a rookie. And then the other thing is, if you're going to be in a rookie that's in a tough situation like this, if you can at least live with getting the kicked out of you the way that I think Jackson Dart has already shown both in college and in the NFL, I think those are ways that you can start to live with some of the ups and downs that you might otherwise get with a rookie.
I'm going to admit that I just don't really have a good feel for how I think this will go and how I think this should go in the best case scenario for the Giants, right? The best thing here is that Russell Wilson is a much higher floor quarterback than Jackson Dart. Your offense is capable with Russell Wilson, Brian Daboll, and Mike Kafka. You have a great defense. You don't have to do a ton on offense. If you are a slightly below average offense with Russell Wilson, you have one of the best 6 or 7 defenses in the league. You can get to a playoff berth right on the verge of that, and these guys can keep their jobs, and then we'll unleash Jackson Dart next offseason. Think about what he looked like in the preseason. We're so excited about him. We deserve to see this through. That to me is probably the best case scenario in a vacuum, Dave. I just don't know how realistic that is, because I do think that the defense has a high ceiling, but we have not seen them do it. We just talked about some of the questions we have about the secondary, and I have real questions about the offense's ability to be anything decent with Russell Wilson and everything else that's going on here. My swing point was the offensive line. I just don't know what the offensive line is going to be, especially with Andrew Thomas still out. If Andrew Thomas is back and healthy, this has a chance to be a passable offensive line. But when you're shooting for the middle, you can always be worse than that. And I do think the right side specifically, you have stopgap guys in Greg Van Roten and Jermaine Illuminor. And so if we have a below-average offensive line, Malik Neighbors we're very excited about, but other than that, it's Darius Slayton's a complimentary player. Theo Jackson's still a very young player. It's Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scatterbo, and then Russell Wilson. Is the floor on that high enough where you can just ride out the season with that group and win enough games to do it? I just don't think that's possible. Maybe I'm too pessimistic here, but I've never bought that viewpoint of all of this.
Oh, I don't really think it's possible either. I just lean toward a football coach's natural inclination to dance with the devil that he knows, as opposed to put his hopes and dreams on a rookie who's never done this before.
But I think he wants to play Jackson Dart.
I don't think he knows Russell Wilson, though. You know,
that's kind of what I mean. When you see the way the offense looks, and when you see the way he talks about Jackson Dart, maybe I'm reading into this too much, and this is too much of me trying to manifest something I find much more interesting than watching 17 games of Russell Wilson. But I don't know. I'm just picking up on little signs that it feels like it's pointing to Jackson Dart being the more compelling choice here, not just for a football watcher, but for Brian Daboll.
This is exactly why I would have either fired this regime last year, or at the very least, and maybe John Mara did behind the scenes, but at the very least, I would have given them a real vote of confidence. Like, hey, if you like Dart, draft him. I'm not going to fire you if you start 0-6 this year. And so I would be so much more excited about the Giants if I was confident that the regime was going to be in place beyond 2025, just from the standpoint of like continuity and maintaining a vision. So I'm with you, Robert. When push comes to shove, I think desperate regimes do desperate, potentially stupid things.
Let's dig into this, because what's keeping me up at night is this exact thought. And I know this is the pessimistic outlook on it. And I want to make clear, I'm going to make this very clear. I didn't just forget what Brian Daboll did with Daniel Jones a couple of years ago. It's been long enough now where I think the shine has come off of it, and I've become just a little bit more skeptical of this regime, and I'm not sure these are the right guys in New York. I have my questions about that. But the idea of Brian Daboll being able to create something compelling and interesting and dynamic around Jackson Dart, again, based on his history and some of the things we've seen him do, I am open to that idea. So I don't think that's off the table. But what's keeping me up at night is that if these aren't the right guys, if we have enough evidence out there that they struggle to put together a really good offense, and it wasn't just the Daniel Jones problem, are they doing the same thing I've watched the Bears do over and over and over again, where you've allowed a regime that's a lame duck group to do things that stretch your future and put you in a tough spot moving forward in order to save themselves, or at least wave a hand at the idea of, well, look at the future that we're building for ourselves. We drafted a quarterback in the first round. So many first-round quarterbacks, when you look at the history of it, come right before regimes get fired, because they're often done out of desperation. And I do think them deciding that they were going to go for Jackson Dart this year it's a Hail Mary, right? It's a last gasp for this group. And they didn't give up that much to get him, and I think they should be commended for that. Like, only giving up 2/3 in order to do it is a much smaller price than other teams have paid. But you still gave up multiple picks and used a first-round pick on a quarterback. You still spent a ton of money in free agency this year in order to shore up some holes to get decent right away. And if these aren't the right guys, and you've done all that for naught, and now you're going to be hiring a new coaching staff and front office next year who didn't pick Jackson Dart and now has far fewer resources to work with because of what you allowed this front office to do, what does that mean for the next group? And I know that is the sky is falling viewpoint here, but I've seen this movie a bunch of times, and I just am worried about it ending the same way.
That's a perfectly valid discussion. They won like 4 games last year, and they didn't.
Their over-under is 5.5. That's real.
Yes, for a team that had when their best season was we dragged Daniel Jones into the playoffs barely, and then won a very bizarre game against a funny Vikings team. When that is your peak, but then we've seen the lows be this, where you are winning 3-4 games and being truly one of the worst teams in the league, that to me scares me, and that is not necessarily a regime I would have given another chance. The Daboll versus Shane part of it, in terms of the blame pie, I do think is interesting. I think there's a chance that Daboll is still a very good play caller and could, either with the Giants or down the line if he gets another chance, still prove to be one of those guys who can make a good offense. The letting Shane pick a quarterback part of it, I think, is a little bit more dubious to me, but I guess at this point they've just kind of been stuck writing it out with these two together, and you might as well keep them tied instead of ending up in the different Bears spot where you end up with the GM and the head coach constantly out of order.
Thing is, Brian Daboll might not be the play caller. I think Mike Kafka is calling plays again for this team this year. And that's one of the other problems with this, is that the playbook they've kind of followed here, I've watched this playbook so many times. The snip-snap of who's calling plays, firing coordinators, having these battles with coordinators, so many of the personality things, the stretching yourself for a first-round quarterback. And the other part of this, if we're trying to lay some blame at Joe Shane's feet here, that I think is a consistent theme, and it reminds me of one of the problems I've had with the Ryan Poles regime in Chicago. Not being able to properly scout your own talent, to me, is the marker of a troubled regime. And the fact that they let Xavier McKinney walk in free agency only to have to pay Javon Holland the next year because they let Xavier McKinney walk in free agency, there are just enough alarm bells here where I am concerned about how this is all going to end up and what it means for the multi-year plan for the Giants. I know that is the most skeptical possible outlook, Dave, but it's just hard for me not to go there.
I do think, some of your scar tissue might be a part of that, but like it's there, man. Like it makes sense, and we can get into it. There's a version of this Giants team that I think could be pretty feisty, but it's way easier to imagine the version that goes the way you're describing. I don't think that's unfair.
What are you watching, Derrik, in the first month of the season as we try to put together that feisty version of the Giants?
Assuming we aren't getting Jackson Dart in the first month of the season, and assuming the pass rush is like as good as we think it is, the part of it that I'm really curious to see is like, how good is Javon Holland? Because I really think at his peak, he was like about to become what felt like, one of those like knocking on the door of all-pro type safety, and then he gets banged up a little bit, and last year was kind of the year after year for him, so he wasn't fully healthy. There's been a lot of weird stuff in terms of like the volatility and the vibes around the Miami defense the last couple of years anyway, so it just felt like a weird spot for him to be in. He is such a good, like, versatile, move-around, ball-hawking type of safety at his best. Putting that behind what is, like, a horrifyingly scary pass rush, there's just a chance that he gets his hand on the ball a lot this year, and I'm very excited to see if, like, right out of the gate he looks like that guy again.
I'll extend this to the whole defense. What does the whole defense look immediately? Because if we're building that feisty Giants team, Dave, that can, like, sneak into a wild card, it has to start with one of the best defenses in the league. And I think we feel good about what the pass rush can be, but the linebacker group falling into place, the interior pieces, maybe being a little bit better than we thought, the run defense being a little bit better than it's been over the last couple years, and the secondary coming together. Like, I want to see it. And maybe it takes a few games, but by midseason, what does this defense look like, to me is the biggest question outside of who's playing quarterback and what does that mean, is what is the ceiling for this group, period.
Yeah, I think it's a name we haven't said that I'm interested to see what he does for an encore, which is Shane Bowen. And, we had, again, we had expectations for what the pass rush would look like and how it would affect the Giants defense last year, and it just did not work the way that anybody would prefer. And this is talent-wise not like an elite unit, certainly the pass rush, but like across the defense, I wouldn't say you have elite talent, but you've got to cobble together better results on the back end. And I'll say it one more time, if this defense was, I don't know, like 18th to 20th in the league this year across the board, and like that's how the secondary performed and you're getting the results you want from the pass rush, that would be a really encouraging place, I think. Like that's a pretty encouraging step in my opinion, other than the fact that there's the potential for starting all over with a new scheme next year if they clean house, if it goes poorly.
I think that's what you're watching over the first month of the season, Derrik, is essentially, can this team stay relevant for long enough for us to be interested in what they turn into over the course of the year?
So that's actually what I was going to say, too. Like, 18th to 20th would be a huge improvement for them. They were one of the worst defenses in the league last year. I also think that would not be good enough for them to not be all fired by, like, week 9. Like, because I just don't think the offense is going to be good enough for that.
I think that's right.
For the 18th best defense to really be upholding you. Like, it has to be, I would say, like the 10th best defense for them to get enough runway for the offense to be like, okay, we can squeak by into some of these games. And so that to me is like, I think the defense has to be like the offense. I'll give some grace. I know they're going to try to see what they can do with Jackson Dart and some of the other young players, but the defense to me has to be like, you have enough veterans here. You've paid enough money for this to be good. It better be pretty good.
Check this out, guys. And Robert, you and I have joked about this. Like I was a lot more bullish on the Giants in like April. Like I could see the vision. I was like, yeah, they got somebody who can get Neighbors the ball and the defense looks nice. They're going to draft Abdul Carter. And then the schedule came out and I just sort of threw that take out the window because this is the start for the New York Giants. It's at Commanders, at Cowboys, Chiefs, Chargers. They do get the Saints after that. But then as soon as that Saints game is over, it's both Eagles games and a road game in Denver against the Broncos. Like, surely, I'm not trying to suggest they won't win a single one of those games, but find the wins for me, man. And then that made me curious, because I'm just thinking about what I know about the New York Giants over the last decade. Since 2016, which is when I would argue was the last time they were like a legitimately good team, they're 7-20 in September. And over that time span, 2022 is the only year where they've been within 3 games of 500. They've been 3 games below 500 or worse at their bye in 8 of the last 9 years. Like, with the very lone exception of 2022, they've just been an afterthought by the time the calendar turns to like mid-October. Like, they have not even been able to trade wins and losses. Like, they have very much gotten out to bad starts. And in late September of most years, we're talking about hot seats and quarterback changes and like all the negative press that goes along with a slow start. I need them to do. I need them to be trading wins and losses. Like, that is what I need them to be doing. And I don't see it with what the schedule gods have decreed that they get this year. Like, it looks very tough.
Is this like the vibes are permanently bad in New York until proven otherwise situation?
So that's exactly where I land with this, and I know that's terrible analysis. And I want to listen.
Sometimes we got to lean into the vibes, man. There's nothing wrong with that.
I want to listen to fan bases when they're trying to tell you things about the roster. And I do think that there is a contingent of Giants fans that's looking at the defense, looking at the pass rush, seeing the best case scenario there, and looking at not Daniel Jones at quarterback and saying there is a path for us here. And I want to be open to that. I just can't get there. And maybe I'm just spectacularly wrong about the Giants. Maybe the Giants are one of the best defenses in the league. Maybe they are a wild card team. But I do think what's hanging over them when it comes to those vibes, Derrik, I just can't ignore it. And I know that's not the most high-level analysis of an NFL team coming into a season, but I just can't get away from that right now, and I wish that I could. I wish I could just eject it from my brain, and I just can't do it.
It's hard not to. And, like, the Bears are the perfect example. Like, the Bears were a top 10 defense last year, early in the year, until all of the vibes truly came crashing down because all this, pretty much all the same factors that we're seeing with the Giants here.
So with that in mind, Dave, what in your mind is a successful season for the New York Giants?
There's 2 options here. They forge the hard road and do what we all just said we don't think they can do. And I don't even think they need to make the playoffs, but like 6 to 8 wins and looking competitive and like looking like a team on the rise, I think that could be a successful season. Or Jackson Dart just looks awesome in a lost year. Like, I'm thinking if Jackson Dart were to look like Drake May in a year that got everybody fired in New England. Hey, Derrik, just listen.
Hold on.
I didn't say that I thought it would happen. I just said if it did happen. If Jackson Dart looks like the type of quarterback that you can build around. Like, if
quarterback worth building around. That's exactly what I was going to say. If he looks like a quarterback worth building around. And I think we have to be open to that idea.
You got to at least consider it possible.
I'll at least say he's looked better. Like, the preseason has looked more competent than I thought it was going to. So I'm at least open to that. They've done a great job of
setting him up for success.
Yes.
They've done a great job of tailoring it correctly for him. And if that's the case, Dave, I agree with you that that's the answer for the best case scenario for the health of the New York Giants. That's not the best case scenario or the best answer for what is a successful season for Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen. Because if you win 7 games, even if Jackson Dart is showing you something, I still think it's really hard to keep your jobs in this moment. If they go 6-11, how well does Jackson Dart need to play for this group to be back?
If Jackson Dart plays that way, then it doesn't, like, that's an afterthought. And, like, that's the cost of doing business in the NFL. But in this world, and I don't want to offend Derrik's sensibilities here, but in this world where Jackson Dart looks like the future of the New York Giants, people will line up to take this job. And the pass rush will still be there. You'll have the quarterback. Like, this will be a desirable job for a legacy franchise in a big market. They could go after next year's Ben Johnson and probably get him. So I'm sorry to Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, but, like, that's the cost of doing business. Like, I don't think anybody other than them is really going to care if Jackson Dart hits and they suck.
I like this a lot, actually, because I think I was too stuck in what is a successful season for like this regime and what they need. That probably shouldn't matter. And I think the Patriots are a good comparison here, where it's like they have a new coach. It didn't matter. Jake May looked good enough last year for you to be excited about this moving forward. And the best case scenario for me, Derrik, is the Giants defense what we thought the Patriots defense might be last year, right? That to me is actually when you combine the two. Like, they realized the promise of a defense in a way the Patriots did not, because they were hurt and a bunch of things started, piling on top of one another. But if the defense shows this is a pass rush that can be really good over the next 2 to 3 years, the free agents hit, this defense is good, Jackson Dart is something. You combine those two. If you're a Giants fan, it probably doesn't matter to you who the coach is next year. That's enough for you to feel good about how this season went. I think that's right.
Success for them is being like a 7-win version of last year's Broncos. Like that is what success probably looks like for them. With a quarterback, it's like, okay, we can do something with this. And then the defense proves it's like, okay, we've got a really good pass rush and something to build on. Obviously, that's a little bit different because Sean Payton had already been there. And in this case, 7 wins probably gets Brian Daboll fired. But then you can go out and hire whoever you think your Sean Payton is going to be.
I swear, I'm really not trying to convince anybody that Jackson Dart will be Drake May. But I just want to point out, too, Drake May wasn't even the week 1 starter in New England. Like, they had to go through all this rigmarole as well. So even if Jackson Dart doesn't get on the field until the second half of the season, if he's good, that's more than enough, I think, for Giants fans.
But if he's not on the field to the second half of the season, is this regime here till the end of the season? Like,
no,
they're just so
not.
This isn't even me taking like a dour outlook here. It's just a team where I just don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how the different competing motivations and timelines and views of the coaching staff, ownership, all of this is going to play out. I've said this a couple times this offseason, and I'll say it explicitly here. It's just one of the harder teams for me to figure out, because I understand the best case scenario, but it's just really hard for me not to pay attention to the worst case scenario, and where they land between those, I just don't have a good sense of. That's just the long and the short of it. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.